party group of MPs, of which I was one, and it was really all parties involved, that managed to defeat 90 days and get it down to 28. Now, I'm not proud of 28, I think it should be less, but there is a function of Parliament there, and there is a function of MPs standing up for Parliament and for liberties, and a number of us succeeded in doing that.
OK, here's another question on one of our video clips.
There are many people that don't participate in the voting system, and I'd like to know what the parties, the political parties, are doing to encourage these people to participate in the system, because their votes do count.
John Rees, your answer to that?
Well, you've got to make it meaningful. I mean, there's a great deal of so-called voter apathy, but which is actually voter abstention right across the board. It's perhaps more concentrated in ethnic minorities, but it's there generally. And that's what happens when you take the politics out of politics. I mean, New Labour's project was that it would have a pragmatic approach, that there would only be one economic model, that it was a question of management and delivery, not a question of ideological division. But if you take the politics out of politics, what's left? Ambition, greed, avarice. No wonder people don't vote.
I'm getting the idea people might be more interested in this one, in this election. I think turnout could well be up on what it was last time, 61%. MEHDI HASAN, do you think that will in some way address some of the changes about apathy, some of the charges about apathy that have been made?
I hope so. It'll show people that actually when an election is close, when there's choices on offer, when there are things at stake, when people feel their vote can make a difference, then turnout will be higher. If those factors don't exist, then what do you expect? Turnout will be lower. Having said that, and I totally sympathise with everything John said, and it's a view I share, I still have to be slightly awkward and say to the viewer and to people who say, you know, we don't vote and take us seriously, well, why not? There's a great faction of people in this country who are apathetic, and there's no point apologising for them, that's shameful.
Is it apathy, though? Is it more like John Rees said? Is it actual hostility to the political class and the political system as a whole? It's an active decision, it's an active rebellion against politics.
I think it's a mixture. I think there's a hostility, and obviously the expenses crisis where MPs are abusing their allowances has added to this sense of they're all in it for themselves, they're not in it for me, which is a justified sense of anger. But I think there's always been a hardcore rump of people, which perhaps has grown, perhaps it's a generational thing, my generation, younger generations, which basically doesn't have any interest in politics, wants to get on with watching telly, making money and getting on with their lives.
Jeremy Corbyn, I know quite a few people live in your constituency, Islington North. It's generally seen as a very safe Labour seat. If I was going to vote anything other than Labour, there wouldn't really be much point in voting. It wouldn't make any difference whatsoever to the outcome or to the results of the overall election. What do you tell those people? Why should you bother voting anything but Labour in Islington North?
There's a massive turnover of population in my constituency, so it is not half as predictable as people think it is. I've also noticed in this election that the interest in the election has increased as time has gone on. The voter registration is better and more efficient in all constituencies than previous elections. I've also noticed that those people that have relatively recently achieved British citizenship in the past 5-10 years are much more determined to vote than the rest of the population, which I think is interesting. Because it
but deal with my question that the fact is that in the vast majority of seats, you might as well not bother voting for all the
400 seats are likely not to change hands in this election.
Is it so outrageous that if there's overwhelming support for a particular candidate or party, they get elected in that area? I mean, I think we're sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. What is wrong with a community electing a member of Parliament? What is wrong with a party having strong support in a particular area? Is that a crime?
Yes, safe seats is a crime.
Why is it a crime?
In a democracy, no politician should be safe.
It's because the Labour vote is class-based. That's what you're against. That's what's upsetting you.
It's not upsetting me at all.
Well, why are you against it?
I'm against any politician having safety. I believe in a democracy you should be able to get rid of your elected member of Parliament if you live in a safe seat. Something to do with Labour. David Cameron's safe in Witney. I don't want safe Conservative seats either. I don't know why you're making it a party issue. There are 400 seats in this country which will not change hands on Thursday in the closest election in living memory. That's an outrage, Jeremy, and people who normally support you will be outraged on Thursday. And the case for electoral reform on Friday morning will be unanswerable if the Lib Dems come second and get tiny proportions.
One other point here, Jeremy, I mean, and John Rees come in on this as well if you want, which is that because the only seats which really change hands are 150 or so Middle English marginals, all politics seems to be geared towards answering the concerns of those few Middle Englanders.
You should be in favour of changing more than anyone.
Is that not why, in John Rees's words, that politics has come out of politics? You first, then John Rees.
I'm in favour of a constituency basis. I'm prepared to look at alternative voting. I don't want... Can I finish? There doesn't need to be a break in the constituency link with the MP.
Okay.
I think that's important.
Is the constituency link the most important thing? I mean, we've talked of all sorts of other deficiencies of the current system, that it doesn't count everyone's vote equally, that most people feel they can't affect the outcome, that the results are disproportionate, but you're saying the constituency link trumps all that.
I think the constituency link is very important. I say that as somebody that served as a constituency
John
MP
Rees,
for a
just
very long
quickly,
time.
and then we'll go on to another question.
Well, I think this is fundamentally a question of political content, not method. You can have a proportional representation method which will institutionalise middle ground and be as unrepresentative of what voters want.
But why? Because, I mean, there probably is a vote for your kind of left-wing politics, left of the Labour Party politics, that you could probably get MPs in Parliament. You could have a ginger
yeah,
group
and I'm not
drag
against
politics to the
and I'm
left,
not against electoral reform, although that doesn't necessarily have to tie it to a particular form of proportional representation or even to proportional representation as a whole. I'm in favour of that. But there is a much bigger question here. You see, you raised the question of why people don't vote, and they did a study after the last general election when the turnout was very low. And what they found is that the majority of people who didn't vote weren't apathetic in the way that MEHDI's talked about them, but were consciously deciding it was a kind of political strike on their part. And the reason that this election has opened up, the reason there is a contest, is because, I mean, on however narrow a spectrum, Nick Clegg is saying we don't want Trident. He's saying we'll have an amnesty on immigrants, and this is sufficiently different, and they are perceived, rightly or wrongly, as an anti-war party. Now that is at least a big political question which people can identify with.
Right.
Now, whether or not they'll do it, I'm not a Liberal supporter, but that's what's bust the whole question open.
Let's go to our next question.
Don't you think that we need parliamentary reforms to reserve seats for ethnic minorities?
Parliamentary reforms. MEHDI HASAN.
To reserve actual parliamentary seats for ethnic minorities. I've never heard that one before in all the various reforms that come in front of it all the time. I'm not sure I'm in favour of that because it's a dangerous road and don't know where it leads us. I do think
there was a form of that though. There were proposals for all black shortlists, for instance.
I think that's a separate issue. I think political parties.
But that effectively reserves a seat if it applies in a safe Labour seat, for instance.
Well, I'm against safe seats, so that would opt me out of that. And Jeremy could take on board that argument. I would argue that political parties have an obligation to increase representation, and the studies show, the international examples show, that it's only through shortlists that women and ethnic minorities have their representation increased. So when the Tories, for example, say we want to increase the number of women and ethnic minorities, but we're going to do it through kind of voluntary action, and the Lib Dems say the same, the Lib Dem is an all-white party, it doesn't work. And actually, to their credit, the Labour Party have made huge inroads in this, in terms of representation, both women and ethnic minorities. But I'm not sure I could reserve actual parliamentary constituencies. That'd be very divisive and would almost ghettoise certain areas of the country even more than they already are.
Jeremy Corbyn, in this election we're probably not going to end up with vastly more black MPs, even though we've had black MPs in Parliament for 23 years now. Has the representation of black Britons stalled?
No, I don't think so. Labour have done quite a lot, partly because of black self-representation within the party, which was a big struggle, and partly through the insistence of a woman and minority ethnic person on all open selection shortlists, which certainly has helped. We're not completely there yet, but I remember the breakthrough of 1987, and that was because of a huge debate in the Labour Party in the 70s and 80s about having black sections within the party. I'm not in favour of reserved seats for all the reasons that
influence of the
many
trade union movement's been blamed in Labour, has been blamed by some for the relative lack of ethnic candidates getting selected in safe seats, because the white male trade unionists are fixing up all the seats for their chance.
I think things have changed quite a bit in that respect. Most unions now have black self-organisation sections, and numbers of black candidates are sponsored and supported, well, not sponsored but supported by unions. I think the debate has moved on quite a lot in that respect.
OK, well, while I'm on the subject of Jeremy Corbyn, I am required by Ofcom rules to say that he is standing against Adrian Berrill-Cox for the Conservatives, Rhodri Jamieson-Ball of the Liberal Democrats and Emma Dixon of the Green Party. And there's also Dominic, Lennon of UKIP. Those are his rival candidates in the Islington North constituency. John Rees, are you satisfied with the level of ethnic minority representation in British politics? Isn't that the question?
Yeah, and my answer is no. And
so what are you going to do about it?
Well, it's interesting how these things come about. You see, how did women get the vote? Actually, it was an extra parliamentary movement that gave women the vote. You could argue it was the women's liberation movement that set the agenda for women being involved in establishment politics. And I would say about Muslim inclusion in as candidates, which we are likely to get an increase in this election. That's because they marched in huge numbers against the Iraq War, because the Gaza protests were huge, because people have had to take account of a Muslim mobilisation on extra-parliamentary politics, and that's now having an effect. Too slow, too little, too late, but inside the establishment politics as well.